Good morning and welcome to World News here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Prospective peace talks between Ukraine and Russia continue. U.S. President Donald Trump talked to Russian leader Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Monday in an attempt to find a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine. Now, Donald Trump said, quote, "It would be great for Russia and Ukraine to hold ceasefire talks at the Vatican." According to Trump, the location would add significance to the proceedings. Moreover, Trump said that if the talks fail, he will back away from the matter.
I think it would be great to have it at the Vatican. Maybe it would have some extra significance. And I saw that it was discussed yesterday, so I thought, and people told me that they'd be honored to do it. I would imagine they would be. So, no, I think it would be maybe helpful. There's tremendous bitterness, anger. And I think maybe that could help some of that anger. So having it at the Vatican would be, in Rome, would be I think it would be a great idea. It's a got very big egos involved, I tell you. Big egos involved. But I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'd just back away and they're going to have to keep going. Again, this was a European situation. It should have remained a European situation. Should have remained. But we have... because the past administration felt very strongly that we should be involved, and we got involved much more than Europe did in terms of the money.
And for more on that topic, let's cross to our Kyiv correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, who prepared this next report.
US President Donald Trump said that Russia and Ukraine would immediately start ceasefire negotiations following the phone conversation that the two leaders had on Monday. However, the Kremlin readout doesn't indicate that ceasefire negotiations are about to begin immediately. However, Putin did say that the negotiations that began in Istanbul last week were generally on the right track. However, there was no indication of what compromises Russia was prepared to make, even though compromises were mentioned. And one of the more glaring statements coming from Putin was that they are ready for a peace memorandum once they address the root causes of the conflict. Now, the root causes of the conflict, according to Russia, are Ukraine's independence, Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine's freedom to join international alliances and partnerships, the European Union, NATO defense partnerships. These are the red lines for Russia, basically Ukraine's sovereignty. Now, Donald Trump boasted following the phone conversation. He thinks it certainly went positively. Let's take a quick listen to what he had to say.
Just completed my 2-hour call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. I believe it went very well. Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire and, more importantly, an end to the war. The conditions for that will be negotiated between the two parties, as it can only be because they know details of a negotiation that nobody else would be aware of. The tone and spirit of the conversation were excellent. If it wasn't, I would say so now rather than later. Russia wants to do large-scale trade with the United States when this catastrophic bloodbath is over, and I agree. There is a tremendous opportunity for Russia to create massive amounts of jobs and wealth. Its potential is unlimited. Likewise, Ukraine can be a great beneficiary of trade in the process of rebuilding its country. Negotiations between Russia and Ukraine will begin immediately. I have so informed President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, President Emmanuel Macron of France, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany, and President Alexander Stubb of Finland during a call with me, immediately after the call with President Putin. The Vatican, as represented by the Pope, has stated that it would be very interested in hosting the negotiations. Let the process begin.
So judging from the statements made by the Kremlin and the White House following those negotiations, those phone conversations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, we are still no closer to understanding if Russia is willing to compromise on anything. They still brought these maximalist demands to Istanbul, and there is no indication that if these negotiations do begin immediately, that Russia would have relented from any of of those maximalist positions. So much more diplomacy to come, but the question from Kyiv will be what measures are going to be implemented to punish Russia if Russia continues to bomb Ukraine relentlessly without moving towards the ceasefire that the White House insists must happen. It's Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
And President Zelenskyy called on his American counterpart to tighten sanctions against Russia if Moscow fails to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. Now, according to Zelenskyy, if there is no ceasefire, new EU sanctions will be introduced, which he says should be followed by a package of restrictions from the United States.
The European sanctions will be announced and will be strong. We have specific dates. We have certain agreements, I'm sure of it. And moreover, I would also like to reassure you that another package will follow. Should there be no ceasefire from the Russian side, there will be robust European sanctions. And with regard to the package from the US, I believe this is a different story. It would take for us to work thoroughly with the US in order for them, at a certain stage in time, to introduce the necessary sanctions. This will help us tremendously, both in the bank area and the economic area. I believe they will have the corresponding influence, and the US will decide whether Russia profits from this war or has to face serious economic challenges.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen took to X to thank Trump for his debrief following the call with Putin, saying it was important that Washington remains engaged in the peace process.
Good call with President Donald Trump, together with President Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and President Alex Stubb, Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and President Zelenskyy to get debriefed from his call with President Putin. I want to thank President Trump for his tireless efforts to bring a ceasefire to Ukraine. It's important that the U.S. stays engaged. We will continue to support Volodymyr Zelenskyy to achieve lasting peace in Ukraine.
Lithuania initiated legal proceedings against Belarus at the International Court of Justice, alleging that Minsk is facilitating the smuggling of migrants into Lithuania. According to a statement issued by the court, Minsk is responsible for the rise in illegal border crossings by failing to take necessary measures to protect the border. Now, in their suit, officials in Vilnius are alleging that the smuggling of migrants through Belarus into Lithuania caused harm to the country's sovereignty, security, and public order. Lithuanian authorities previously raised the issue with their Belarusian counterparts, but Minsk refused to cooperate on curbing illegal migration. Vilnius has accused Belarusian officials of orchestrating the migration crisis since 2021 and demanded Minsk pay 120 million euros for facilitating the mass crossings. The European Commission launches its annual EU budget conference Tuesday under the slogan "From local action to global influence." The next long-term budget will power the EU's shared vision for the future in the context of growing geopolitical, economic, and social challenges. Now, the conference offers a forum for debate on how the EU budget can address specific needs of each EU member state. That includes discussions on EU competitiveness, the bloc's financial interests, and the modernization of the Union's budget revenues through public and private cooperation. The opening debate will be led by the EU Commissioner for Budget, Anti-Fraud and Public Administration, Piotr Serafin. Also, the list of speakers at the event includes the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, and Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. Moving on now to Poland, presidential frontrunner Rafał Trzaskowski addressed the crowd after securing the top spot in the first round of the Polish presidential elections, saying, quote, "We have to stand clearly against radicalism, and we have to show that this is how we will win the election." Now, he emphasized the need for strong cooperation among coalition parties during the election and in the future fight against the judicial reforms implemented by the Law and Justice Party.
This is precisely the first step, because we have to stand together, all of us from the October 15 coalition. We need to finish these reforms initiated 18 months ago. We need cooperation between the president and the government, because times are very difficult. And today, chaos is the last thing we need. We do not need conflict. We need cooperation. And this is the beginning of such cooperation. And for this, I would like to thank the Prime Minister and all my friends from the Polish People's Party. Today, we must stand together, because on the other side is the most radical politician Law and Justice has ever had. We have to stand clearly against radicalism, and we have to show that this is how we will win this election, if we stand together.
The results of the first round show that there is a strong chance of winning, said Law and Justice presidential candidate Karol Nawrocki, telling reporters that he had been underestimated by the polls. Now, while noting that the race remains tight, Nawrocki insisted that he has a significant chance of defeating his rival from the ruling Civic Coalition, Rafał Trzaskowski.
Of course, I am aiming for victory, and the results of the first round show that there is a big chance to win. We can see that over the past 5 months, the polls overestimated Rafał Trzaskowski, and I was underestimated. Many months of a large difference were thinned into a small difference between us. So this is a very good prognosis that in these 2 weeks, I will manage to defeat Rafał Trzaskowski and become the president of Poland.
And the next 2 weeks will be all about convincing the voters who decided to vote on other candidates in the first round, said Jovanka Jakubek-Lalik, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Warsaw, about the next steps for presidential candidates Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki, who will face each other in the presidential runoff on the 1st of June.
Indeed, there is a very narrow difference between the two main contenders, so there will be a struggle to gain more support for the second round. So basically what we need to sum up are the electoral votes coming from two different, let's say, political families in general. So one political family is liberal-oriented, and there we can count not only the Civic Platform Liberal Party, but also the coalition partners and the left-wing parties. But on the other hand, we also have the right-wing and ultra right-wing parties, with also extreme right candidate Grzegorz Braun, who actually gathered quite a lot of support, and that was one of the surprises of the yesterday's election results. So indeed, next 2 weeks will be all about convincing the voters who decided to vote for other candidates in the first round, and also to gain more support and to mobilize the people who decided to stay home.
Now, 1 week before the presidential runoff in Poland, the streets of Warsaw will become a stage for 2 major political marches. On May 25, the center of the Polish capital will see demonstration held in support of the two contenders. Karol Nawrocki, the Law and Justice candidate, announced his march just moments after the first round exit polls were released on Sunday. Calling for unity and dialogue, Nawrocki invited all Poles, regardless of political views, to join a, quote, great march for Poland, beginning at 10 a.m. at the De Gaulle roundabout and expected to proceed down to Castle Square. 2 hours later at noon, another march will set off, this one led by Polish Premier Donald Tusk and Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski. This rally will begin at Bank Square and then head down to Constitution Square, where the Civic Coalition's presidential candidate is expected to speak. And that's all for this edition of World News here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay with us for more news here on TVP World.